The sweltering tropical atmosphere hung heavy over Asto Airfield on Saipan as American military forces continued their relentless push inland during June of 1944. Amidst the desolation of mangled hangars and pockmarked runways, a group of Japanese ground personnel made an astonishing discovery that momentarily eclipsed the incessant roar of artillery fire. A downed F6F Hellcat, remarkably preserved, nestled within the tall grasses near the airfield's perimeter. This was no mere debris. It was an unparalleled opportunity. For a span of nearly 2 years, Japanese aviators had been relaying increasingly desperate accounts of a formidable new American fighter plane that was tearing through their aerial formations with an unprecedented ferocity. The Hellcat had made its combat debut in August 1943, and in a matter of months, it had dramatically shifted the equilibrium of air superiority across the Pacific theater. However, intelligence dispatches and pilot testimonials could only convey a limited perspective. Here, at last, was the tangible reality, the very aircraft systematically decimating Japanese naval aviation, seemingly awaiting meticulous examination. The meticulous recovery operation commenced without delay, even as the ferocious battle for Saipan raged around them. Ground crews, toiling under sporadic enemy fire, meticulously maneuvered the fighter to a more secure location, ultimately preparing it for clandestine transport back to the Japanese homeland. Every passing moment was critical. American forces were advancing with alarming speed, and this invaluable prize could not be permitted to fall back into adversary hands. The Hellcat represented far more than a single aerial machine. It offered an unparalleled insight into American industrial prowess and engineering philosophy, a crucial chance to comprehend the formidable adversary Japan was truly confronting. By the close of June, as Saipan fully succumbed to American dominion, the captured Hellcat was already well on its journey to the Japanese mainland. It arrived at the Yokosuka Naval Air Technical Arsenal, where a cadre of Japan's most distinguished aeronautical engineers eagerly awaited the chance to meticulously dissect it, both conceptually and physically. The initial external scrutiny unveiled an aircraft that appeared undeniably brutish when juxtaposed with the graceful contours of Japanese fighter planes. It possessed a greater heft, a thicker construction, and a more substantial presence in every dimension. Where Japanese fighters had relentlessly pursued elegance and agility through rigorous weight reduction, this American marvel seemed to wholeheartedly embrace sheer mass. The engineers circumambulated the aircraft deliberately on that inaugural day, meticulously recording measurements, running their hands over its riveted panels, and scrutinizing the expansive wings and the formidable cowling that encased its powerful engine. They took particular note of the armor plating position behind the pilot's seat, a barrier sufficiently thick to repel rifle-caliber projectiles. They observed the exceptionally robust landing gear, specifically engineered to endure the punishing stresses inherent in carrier-based operations. Furthermore, they meticulously examined the formidable array of 6.50 caliber machine guns, 3 strategically placed in each wing, accompanied by ammunition boxes capable of holding hundreds of rounds. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Everything about the Hellcat unmistakably articulated a design philosophy that unequivocally prioritized pilot survival, sustained offensive firepower, and unwavering rugged reliability rather than the singular pursuit of pure performance metrics that had guided Japanese fighter development for the preceding decade. What they were scrutinizing was not merely a fighter aircraft. It was a physical embodiment of America's colossal industrial might, and a profoundly divergent answer to the fundamental question of what constituted an effective combat aircraft. The engineers harbored a profound understanding that deciphering this formidable machine might represent Japan's final opportunity to devise an efficacious countermeasure to American air superiority. As they braced themselves to embark upon the intricate and exhaustive examination, they possessed no inkling of the profound revelations this captured fighter would divulge, nor of the disheartening nature of those impending disclosures. By the midpoint of 1944, Japanese naval aviation was experiencing a catastrophic hemorrhage in the skies above the Pacific, a dire reality acknowledged by all, yet one whose full scope few were willing to openly concede. The Mitsubishi A6M0, an aircraft that had instilled terror in Allied pilots throughout 1941 and 1942, had now tragically transformed into a veritable death trap. American pilots had astutely identified its inherent vulnerabilities: compromised handling at elevated speeds, an almost total absence of armor protection, and wing structures that demonstrably failed under the intense G-forces encountered during high-speed dives. More significantly, the Americans had meticulously engineered fighter aircraft specifically designed to exploit these very weaknesses, with the Hellcat standing preeminently at the forefront of that formidable list. The intelligence chasm confronting Japanese aviation was utterly debilitating. Pilots returning from combat, those fortunate enough to survive, would recount harrowing reports of American fighters capable of absorbing an extraordinary volume of damage and inexplicably continuing their flight. They vividly described aircraft that could execute dives away from a zero at velocities that would render pursuit an act of suicidal folly. They reported a devastating firepower that could utterly shred a Japanese fighter with a mere burst. Yet, these accounts from traumatized pilots amidst the pandemonium of combat were not engineering data. They could not provide precise bore and stroke measurements, intricate compression ratios, critical wing loading figures, or detailed fuel system specifications. They were utterly incapable of elucidating how the Americans had successfully resolved complex technical dilemmas that Japanese engineers still grappled with incessantly. The predicament had escalated to such a critical degree that by early 1944, Japanese naval air groups operating in the Pacific were suffering pilot losses at a rate far exceeding their capacity to train replacements. The esteemed First Air Fleet had been utterly decimated at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, a catastrophic engagement that American pilots would subsequently immortalize as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. In a single day of intense aerial combat on June 19, Japan tragically lost approximately 300 aircraft and their utterly irreplaceable cadre of highly trained pilots. The Hellcat had served as the primary instrument of this devastating slaughter, responsible for the vast majority of enemy kills. What exacerbated this crisis to an especially acute degree was the fact that Japan's aeronautical engineering establishment was increasingly operating in a state of profound ignorance. American aircraft were undergoing rapid evolutionary changes, with novel models and variants consistently emerging, each meticulously incorporating lessons gleaned from combat experience and breakthroughs in technological advancement. Japanese intelligence could occasionally acquire general specifications through various clandestine channels, but they remained utterly unable to elucidate the practical engineering solutions that rendered those specifications achievable. How did American engines manage to generate such prodigious power, while simultaneously maintaining remarkable reliability? How did their aircraft manage to withstand damage that would unequivocally obliterate a Japanese fighter? What specific materials and manufacturing methodologies enabled them to construct such exceptionally robust structures without incurring unacceptable weight penalties? The captured Hellcat represented something Japanese engineers desperately craved: irrefutable hard data. Not mere estimates, not combat reports filtered through the obfuscating fog of war, not speculative inferences based on distant observations. Here was a tangible American fighter aircraft that they could meticulously measure, weigh, disassemble, and rigorously test. They could scrutinize every individual component, meticulously analyze every engineering decision, and comprehensively understand every design compromise. They could, at long last, definitively answer the vexing questions that had plagued them since late 1943, when the Hellcat first appeared in significant operational numbers. There was also a profound psychological dimension to the capture that transcended mere technical intelligence. Japanese aviation had been meticulously constructed upon an unwavering conviction in the inherent superiority of their unique design philosophy, that a fighter aircraft should unequivocally prioritize maneuverability and operational range above all other considerations, that highly skilled pilots had no need for burdensome armor or heavy armament, and that an inherent elegance in design intrinsically reflected combat superiority. The Zero had epitomized this philosophy with unparalleled perfection, and for a fleeting period it had utterly dominated the Pacific skies. But now, Japanese pilots were perishing in alarming droves, and the very aircraft responsible for their demise represented a completely antithetical set of design priorities. Examining the Hellcat meant confronting the deeply unsettling possibility that Japan's fundamental assumptions about fighter design had been erroneous from the very beginning. The Hellcat arrived at Yokosuka in disparate pieces, partially disassembled for the exigencies of transport, yet with the majority of its critical components sufficiently intact for a thorough and comprehensive examination. The recovery team had executed an extraordinary feat of engineering under perilous combat conditions, managing to preserve the aircraft's essential systems despite the immensely challenging circumstances of its capture. Engineers immediately established a rigorous and systematic documentation process, meticulously photographing every single component before any detailed examination commenced. They understood implicitly that this might represent their sole opportunity to meticulously study an intact example of America's most triumphantly successful carrier fighter. The initial walk-around inspection alone consumed several days. Dedicated teams of specialists simultaneously scrutinized different facets of the aircraft. Structures engineers concentrated their efforts on the airframe. Powerplant experts focused intently on the engine. Systems specialists meticulously studied the intricate hydraulics and control mechanisms, and armament technicians diligently cataloged the weapons installation. What universally astonished everyone immediately was the sheer, undeniable robustness of the aircraft's construction. Where Japanese fighters typically employed delicate assemblies and minimalist structural elements to conserve precious weight, the Hellcat incorporated heavy forgings, substantial extrusions, and thick skin panels. The aircraft's empty weight was approximately 9,200 pounds, a figure nearly double that of a Zero. The fuselage construction unequivocally revealed a fundamentally divergent approach to stress skin design. Japanese engineers had honed their skills to become masters at fabricating lightweight structures utilizing thin aluminum, meticulously formed and assembled. The Hellcat's fuselage, in stark contrast, employed heavier gauge aluminum complemented by more substantial internal framing. The engineers calculated that the fuselage alone could, in all likelihood, withstand structural loads that would unequivocally tear a Zero apart. They discovered reinforcement in areas Japanese designers would never have considered necessary. Supplementary framing around access hatches, strategically placed doubler plates at points of high stress attachment, and massive bulkheads thoughtfully separating major fuselage sections. The dismantling of major fuselage sections offered profound insights into the Hellcat's construction. The wing structure, in particular, presented a strikingly robust design. The Hellcat's wings were ingeniously engineered around an immense central section, forming a singular, continuous framework that traversed the fuselage. This foundational architecture not only provided an extraordinarily sturdy mount for the landing gear, but also afforded substantial shielding for the pilot and the crucial fuel tanks. In stark contrast, typical Japanese fighter aircraft often employed lighter wing assemblies that were affixed to the fuselage at numerous discrete points, a methodology intended to reduce overall weight, yet one that inevitably concentrated stress and offered considerably less inherent crash protection. Furthermore, the Hellcat's wings incorporated a remarkably substantial leading-edge structure, designed with the capacity to absorb significant combat damage without succumbing to catastrophic structural failure. Engineers observing this design posited that an aircraft could likely sustain the loss of portions of its outer wing panels and still retain its flight capabilities. During those initial days of meticulous scrutiny, the engineering team uncovered another compelling revelation: undeniable evidence of mass production techniques executed on a scale that Japanese industry was simply incapable of matching. The precisely formed panel edges bore the hallmarks of machine fabrication, rather than the more laborious indications of hand craftsmanship. Rivet patterns exhibited perfect uniformity and consistency across the airframe, strongly suggesting the employment of automated or semi-automated assembly processes. Moreover, components demonstrated a level of interchangeability rarely observed in Japanese aircraft, where skilled artisans frequently resorted to hand-fitting parts during the assembly phase. It became evident that the Hellcat had been conceived and designed from its very inception for rapid, high-volume manufacturing, a process that could be efficiently executed by a workforce that did not require years of highly specialized training. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. As the team systematically documented every discovery, a truly unsettling realization began to crystallize. This was not merely a different model of fighter aircraft. It embodied an entirely distinct industrial and engineering philosophy. The Hellcat profoundly represented an American design ethos that unequivocally prioritized the preservation of pilot lives over the marginal gains of saving a few hundred pounds of weight. It underscored a belief that operational reliability held greater importance than extracting a few additional knots of maximum speed. Fundamentally, it posited that an aircraft had to be resilient enough to endure not only the rigors of enemy fire, but also the brutal demands of carrier-based operations and the unavoidable mishaps inherent in high-tempo combat environments. Each and every design choice within the Hellcat unequivocally reflected a set of priorities that Japanese aviation had, for years, systematically de-emphasized. Despite their ingrained training and conventional wisdom regarding aircraft design, the Japanese engineers, with their inherent professionalism, were compelled to acknowledge the undeniable superiority of the solutions they observed. When the specialized engine removal crew finally succeeded in extracting the formidable Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine from the Hellcat's cowling, several engineers simply stood transfixed, staring in awe. They had, of course, reviewed its specifications and intelligence reports, a colossal 2,000 horsepower generated by an 18-cylinder, two-row radial engine. However, the abstract numbers on paper could not adequately convey the visceral reality of physically handling components from this mechanical behemoth. The engine alone tipped the scales at approximately 2,360 pounds, a staggering weight that significantly surpassed that of many entire Japanese fighter aircraft just a few years prior. The meticulous disassembly process then commenced. Engineers painstakingly photographed each stage, precisely measured every individual component, and recorded detailed observations concerning the assembly methodologies. The R2800 cylinder heads were the first elements to be detached, immediately exposing the intricate combustion chambers and valve arrangements, which instantly ignited intense technical discussions among the specialists. The engine's bore measured an impressive 5.75 inches, coupled with a stroke of 6 inches, culminating in a total displacement of 2,800 cubic inches, or nearly 46 liters. For contextual comparison, the Nakajima Sakai engine, which powered the iconic Zero fighter, displaced a mere 27.9 liters and produced approximately 1,130 horsepower. This stark disparity revealed that the Americans were achieving almost twice the power output from an engine that was not even twice the displacement, showcasing remarkable efficiency. Yet, displacement alone could not entirely account for the profound performance differential. As the engineers delved deeper into the R2800's internal architecture, they progressively uncovered layer upon layer of exceptionally sophisticated engineering solutions. The crankshaft, for instance, was a massive, robust forging, meticulously machined to tolerances that Japanese manufacturing facilities consistently struggled to attain. The connecting rods were fabricated from advanced alloys and incorporated ingenious design features specifically engineered to mitigate stress concentrations. The pistons exhibited clear evidence of highly sophisticated casting techniques and integrated internal cooling galleries, which were crucial in managing the immense thermal loads generated by the engine's high compression ratios and aggressive ignition timing. The supercharger system proved particularly captivating to the powerplant specialists. The R2800 utilized an advanced two-speed, two-stage supercharger that possessed the remarkable capability to sustain high manifold pressure across a broad spectrum of altitudes. In contrast, Japanese engines typically employed simpler, less effective supercharger designs, a pragmatic compromise driven partly by inherent manufacturing limitations and partly by a tactical emphasis on optimized low-altitude performance, where the majority of Pacific combat engagements occurred. The American supercharger, therefore, represented an unparalleled level of precision manufacturing, demanding specialized machinery and rigorous quality control processes that Japanese industry simply did not possess in sufficient quantities. The fuel injection system unveiled yet another significant advantage. While many contemporary Japanese engines still relied on carburetors, which were prone to causing fuel starvation during negative G maneuvers, the R2800 featured a highly sophisticated injection system designed to deliver a consistent and uninterrupted fuel flow irrespective of the aircraft's attitude. This seemingly minor technical detail carried profound implications for combat effectiveness. American pilots were empowered to execute aggressive negative G dives without their engines faltering, whereas Zero pilots were forced to roll their aircraft inverted before diving to maintain positive G and ensure their engines continued to operate. That critical half-second of additional maneuvering time could, and often did, spell the decisive difference between life and death in the frantic chaos of a dogfight. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of all was the engine's unmistakable margin for reliability. Every facet of the R2800's construction strongly suggested it was engineered to consistently produce 2,000 horsepower not as an ephemeral maximum emergency setting, but as a sustained and dependable combat power output. Its components were, by Japanese standards, demonstrably overbuilt. Bearing surfaces were notably larger than might have been deemed strictly necessary. Cooling passages were generously proportioned, and the oil circulation system was robustly designed. The Americans had, it appeared, made a deliberate strategic decision that engine reliability was a worthwhile trade-off for the inherent weight penalty associated with heavier, more durable construction. Japanese engines, conversely, were frequently pushed to their absolute operational limits, with components meticulously sized to the minimum acceptable tolerances in an effort to shave off every conceivable gram of weight. The outcome of this philosophy was engines that, on paper, boasted impressive power-to-weight ratios but, in the brutal crucible of combat operations, suffered from frequent and often catastrophic failures. As the engineering team systematically cataloged their extensive findings, they confronted an uncomfortable and undeniable truth. Replicating the R-2800's formidable performance would necessitate not merely superior design principles, but an entire advanced industrial infrastructure that Japan simply did not possess. The specialized alloys, the precision machinery, the rigorous quality control systems, and the profound manufacturing expertise, all of these foundational elements would require years to develop, and Japan, tragically, did not have the luxury of years. The examination of the fuel system commenced with a deceptively simple tap on the Hellcat's wing tanks. Instead of the expected hollow, resonant metallic ring typically associated with an aluminum fuel cell, the engineers registered a dull, muted thud. With painstaking care, they cut into the tank and uncovered layers of a resilient, rubber-like material meticulously sandwiched between the internal aluminum structure. This revealed the presence of self-sealing fuel tanks, designed with the remarkable capability to spontaneously close around bullet holes and effectively prevent catastrophic fuel loss. This technology was far from a mere theoretical concept. Japanese engineers were certainly aware of the existence of self-sealing tanks, but witnessing one meticulously disassembled revealed the extraordinary sophistication of the American implementation. The ingenious self-sealing mechanism employed multiple distinct layers of various materials. The innermost layer comprised a synthetic rubber compound specifically formulated to swell rapidly upon exposure to aviation gasoline, thereby automatically plugging small punctures. Outward from this layer lay a stratum of untreated fabric, followed by a layer of vulcanized rubber, and finally, the aluminum outer skin. When a projectile pierced these layers, the escaping gasoline would trigger the expansion of the inner rubber layer into the perforation within mere seconds, effectively arresting the leak before any significant quantity of fuel could be lost. Japanese engineers rigorously tested the system by intentionally puncturing a sample section of the tank and then pouring gasoline through it. They observed with keen interest as the hole sealed itself completely in approximately 15 seconds. The implications of this discovery were truly staggering. American pilots could endure multiple hits to their fuel tanks and still successfully navigate their aircraft back to base, whereas a single tracer round impacting a Zero's unprotected fuel tank would invariably transform the aircraft into a fiery inferno. The weight penalty incurred for this vital protection was, admittedly, substantial, approximately 200 pounds per aircraft solely for the fuel tank's defensive layers. Japanese designers had, throughout the war, consistently rejected the incorporation of self-sealing tanks, vehemently arguing that the added weight would unacceptably degrade the aircraft's performance and that highly trained pilots should simply possess the skill to avoid being hit in the first place. However, the brutal and undeniable realities of combat had mercilessly exposed the profound flaw in that reasoning. Zeros were plummeting from the sky, consumed by flames, by the hundreds, and with them perished their meticulously trained veteran pilots, who were ironically expected to be skilled enough to render such protection unnecessary. The revelation was stark. Even those pilots, expected to possess sufficient expertise to negate the need for defensive measures, were perishing alongside their less experienced comrades. Upon scrutinizing the cockpit area, engineers discovered an ubiquitous presence of armor plating. Directly behind the pilot's seat, a substantial steel plate, approximately 3/8 inch in thickness, was strategically positioned and angled to effectively deflect incoming rounds from both the rear and below. Further reinforcing this protective shell, the headrest seamlessly incorporated additional armored elements. Even the windscreen, crafted from specialized armored glass, boasted sufficient thickness to withstand and neutralize rifle-caliber projectiles launched from the front. The cumulative mass of this extensive armor system approached a formidable 240 pounds, a weight Japanese designers would have unequivocally deemed utterly unacceptable and antithetical to their design principles. In stark contrast, the renowned Zero fighter carried no armor whatsoever. Not a single protective plate shielded Japanese pilots from the lethal onslaught of enemy fire, leaving them completely exposed. To precisely ascertain the efficacy of this defensive layering, the dedicated engineering team meticulously conducted rigorous ballistic tests, employing captured Japanese ammunition. They strategically arranged various armor samples at differing distances, then discharged 7.7 mm rounds from a Type 89 machine gun. The results were unequivocally clear. The Hellcat's armor system proved impenetrable, stopping every single projectile. Even the more potent 20 mm rounds fired from a Type 99 cannon, while inflicting visible damage upon the plate, consistently failed to achieve full penetration when tested at typical combat ranges. In their subsequent reports, the engineers emphatically stated that American pilots benefited from a formidable defense system, rendering them nearly invulnerable to the primary offensive weapons carried by Japanese fighters. Conversely, Japanese pilots occupied cockpits where even a comparatively minor pistol round possessed the potential to prove fatally destructive, highlighting a profound disparity in survivability. The comprehensive array of survival equipment within the Hellcat further underscored this overarching narrative of pilot preservation. The pilot seat, for instance, was engineered with exceptional robustness, specifically designed to absorb the immense stresses of carrier landings, impacts that would shatter conventional, furniture-grade seating. Integrated seamlessly into the cockpit's sophisticated systems was a CO2 fire suppression unit, capable of instantly flooding the engine bay with an inert gas, thus swiftly extinguishing any nascent fire. Moreover, the pilot's restraint system was an advanced 5-point harness, meticulously crafted to secure him firmly in place during the most violent aerial maneuvers or unforeseen crash landings. This holistic design philosophy radiated a singular, unambiguous message: the pilot's life held intrinsic and paramount value, a worth far exceeding any marginal weight savings that might be achieved by compromising protective features. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. This profound understanding suddenly brought a chilling clarity to previously perplexing Japanese combat reports. For months, Japanese aviators had recounted tales of Hellcats absorbing dozens of direct hits, yet inexplicably continuing to engage and fight with undiminished ferocity. They had also reported American pilots who appeared utterly fearless, persistently pressing their attacks even when under intense enemy fire. Now, the engineers grasped the critical distinction. These American pilots were not necessarily endowed with superior bravery. Rather, they were simply afforded far greater protection. They possessed the crucial advantage of being able to commit to aggressive maneuvers, secure in the knowledge that their aircraft was meticulously engineered to bring them safely home, even after sustaining significant battle damage. In stark contrast, Japanese pilots, flying unarmored aircraft with notoriously unprotected fuel tanks, were compelled to exercise an infinitely higher degree of caution, acutely aware that even a single, fortuitous enemy shot could prove instantly lethal. Consequently, By August 1944, rendering the captured Hellcat airworthy became an absolute and urgent priority for the Japanese. It was deemed crucial that their own test pilots experience firsthand the formidable challenges and capabilities that their combat aviators had been confronting in the vast skies above the Pacific theater. The dedicated restoration team embarked on a relentless, around-the-clock effort, painstakingly cannibalizing salvageable parts from other captured equipment and meticulously fabricating components they were unable to procure. The powerful R-2800 engine, a marvel of American engineering, received exhaustive attention from the engineers, who were determined to have it operating at its full, original specifications to obtain the most accurate and comprehensive performance data. By September 1944, the meticulously restored Hellcat was finally prepared for its inaugural flight under Japanese control. Commander Takahide Aoi, one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's most seasoned and respected test pilots, settled into the cockpit at Yokosuka Air Base. His initial impression was one of confined quarters. The Hellcat, designed for the generally larger American physique, felt distinctly cramped even for average-sized Japanese aviators. However, this minor discomfort swiftly dissipated the very moment Aoi advanced the throttle for takeoff. The R-2800 engine roared to life, with an astonishing sound unlike any Japanese engine he had ever encountered. A profound, guttural thunder that unequivocally bespoke enormous, untapped power reserves. The acceleration down the runway was, by Japanese standards, nothing short of brutal. The Hellcat, with a takeoff weight exceeding 12,000 pounds, was significantly heavier than any fighter aircraft Aoi had ever commanded. Yet, the colossal engine effortlessly overwhelmed this mass, with an astonishing display of raw horsepower. The aircraft rotated and climbed away from the runway at an angle of ascent that would have been utterly impossible for a Zero. Aoi meticulously documented in his post-flight report that the initial climb rate exceeded an astounding 3,500 feet per minute at sea level, a performance figure substantially superior to anything then available in the Japanese inventory. Once airborne and established, Aoi commenced a systematic and rigorous testing regimen. He masterfully put the Hellcat through an extensive series of climbs, steep dives, and sharp turns, meticulously recording its performance characteristics at various altitudes and engine power settings. The aircraft's handling, he observed, presented a distinct departure from that of Japanese fighters. It demanded heavier control forces, exhibited less responsiveness in pitch, and generally required more physical exertion to maneuver aggressively. However, these seemingly ponderous controls conferred a profound benefit rarely experienced by Japanese pilots: rock-solid stability, particularly at high speeds. Aoi deliberately pushed the Hellcat into a steep dive, rapidly accelerating past 400 knots indicated airspeed. A Zero, subjected to such extreme speeds, would typically buffet violently, with its controls becoming mushy and unresponsive, threatening structural integrity. The Hellcat, by contrast, simply dove straight and true, its controls remaining remarkably effective, its massive airframe effortlessly absorbing stresses that would undoubtedly tear lighter aircraft apart. The official test report prominently noted that the Hellcat possessed the inherent capability to simply dive away from virtually any precarious combat situation. This meant that if an American pilot found himself in trouble, he could readily push the nose down and accelerate to speeds at which Japanese fighters simply could not follow without risking catastrophic structural failure. This seemingly simple tactical option, the inherent ability to disengage from combat at will, fundamentally and irrevocably altered the entire dynamic of aerial engagements. Japanese pilots were effectively compelled to commit to every single engagement, as their aircraft lacked the reliable means to escape once a fight had commenced. Conversely, American pilots in Hellcats possessed the strategic luxury of choosing their battles, attacking only when advantageous and confidently diving away when outmatched. Further validating these combat realities, AOE conducted a series of simulated dogfights against various Japanese fighters, including both the nimble Zeros and the newer, more advanced Kawanishi and 1K Shurden. The outcomes of these mock engagements definitively confirmed what combat pilots had been consistently reporting from the front lines. While it was true that in a slow-speed, turning fight, Japanese fighters could indeed outturn the Hellcat pilots, or in this specific instance, Commander AOE himself, simply refused to engage on such disadvantageous terms. By expertly leveraging the Hellcat's superior speed and formidable vertical maneuverability, AOE could completely dictate the terms and conditions of every engagement. He demonstrated the ability to execute powerful zoom climbs, soaring above Japanese fighters using the Hellcat's superior power-to-weight ratio at higher speeds, and then plunge downwards with an overwhelming energy advantage. The Japanese fighters, in their desperate attempts to follow these vertical maneuvers, would rapidly bleed off their airspeed, thereby becoming dangerously slow and transforming into easy targets for the Hellcat's potent armament. Perhaps the most sobering and impactful test involved a meticulous simulation of endurance and combat damage. While engineers had skillfully patched the Hellcat's existing battle damage to ensure its airworthiness, they had deliberately left some non-critical damage in place to observe its effects on overall performance. The aircraft, therefore, flew with several patched bullet holes and minor structural damage that, under normal circumstances, would have immediately grounded any Japanese fighter. Crucially, the performance degradation observed was minimal. The Hellcat remarkably kept flying, kept fighting, and critically, kept bringing the pilot home safely, a testament to its robust construction and resilience. Commander AOE's final report concluded with a powerful and widely circulated statement that resonated profoundly throughout Japanese naval aviation circles. American pilots were not merely operating a different aircraft, they were engaging in combat with a fundamentally distinct understanding of what an aircraft should be inherently capable of enduring. The stark realities presented by the captured Hellcat compelled Japanese engineers to confront a fundamental question they had, for too long, actively avoided: what was the true, essential purpose of a fighter aircraft? For over a decade, Japanese naval aviation had steadfastly pursued a singular design philosophy, a vision perfectly embodied by the iconic Zero. This doctrine asserted that a fighter aircraft should be light, exceptionally maneuverable, and possess an extensive operational range to effectively support offensive operations across the vast expanse of the Pacific. Every other design consideration was deemed secondary. Armor was dismissed as superfluous dead weight. Heavy armament was considered unnecessary if a pilot could simply outturn an opponent and place precise, decisive shots. Robust construction was deemed wasteful, an indulgence, when skilled craftsmen could meticulously construct elegant, lightweight airframes. This deeply ingrained philosophy, while having its practical roots in Japan's limited industrial capacity and resource constraints, had nevertheless been elevated to the status of rigid doctrine, almost a religious tenet. The Zero's unparalleled early successes in 1941 and early 1942 seemed to unequivocally validate every one of these assumptions. During this period, Zeros effortlessly carved through Allied opposition. The fighter's astonishing 1,900-mile range allowed it to escort bombers on missions that Allied planners had previously deemed utterly impossible. Its exceptional maneuverability rendered it virtually untouchable in slow-speed dogfights. pilots, rigorously trained in the demanding art of slow-speed combat, evolved into elite warriors, their formidable skills honed through years of dedicated practice. The Zero, in essence, was not merely an aircraft, it was the physical manifestation of the Japanese martial spirit, a symbol of achieving victory through superior individual skill and indomitable fighting spirit, rather than through sheer industrial might or brute force. The Hellcat, in complete philosophical opposition, represented the antithesis of this Japanese design ethos. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation had conceived and designed it with two primary, overarching objectives: to effectively destroy enemy aircraft and, crucially, to bring American pilots home alive. Its design prioritized speed above maneuverability, emphasized overwhelming firepower over delicate finesse, and placed paramount importance on protection over raw performance metrics. The Hellcat's design specifications so heavily prioritized pilot survival that some early Navy reviewers expressed concerns, worrying that it might prove too heavy, too slow, and too much of a truck to effectively compete with the nimble Japanese fighters. However, these initial reservations swiftly evaporated in the crucible of actual combat. The Hellcat ultimately achieved a staggering kill ratio of approximately 19-1 against Japanese aircraft, meaning for every Hellcat lost in aerial combat, 19 enemy fighters were successfully destroyed. The stark numerical disparities between the two opposing fighter aircraft painted an undeniably brutal picture of the aerial conflict. The Mitsubishi Zero, a marvel of Japanese engineering, possessed an empty weight of approximately 3,700 pounds. In stark contrast, the American F6F Hellcat, a formidable machine in its own right, weighed in at a substantial 9,200 pounds when empty, making it nearly 2.5 times heavier than its Japanese counterpart. This considerable additional mass, however, proved to be a critical determinant of survival in the unforgiving skies. The Hellcat was engineered to endure significant battle damage, capable of absorbing impacts that would utterly annihilate a Zero, yet still return its pilot safely to the carrier deck. American aviators, understanding these inherent strengths, meticulously honed tactical approaches that capitalized on their aircraft's superior speed and formidable firepower. Their preferred method involved devastating diving attacks, designed to swiftly neutralize adversaries before protracted turning engagements, where the Zero held an advantage, could even commence. A pivotal innovation in this regard was the Thatch Weave, a defensive formation devised by Commander John Thatch, which enabled Hellcat pilots to offer mutual support, effectively nullifying the Zero's renowned maneuverability. Japanese tactical doctrine, conversely, had long been predicated on the belief that unparalleled individual pilot skill would inevitably overcome any material disadvantage. The most adept pilot in the most agile aircraft, it was theorized, would always prevail. Yet, the Hellcat dramatically diminished the decisive influence of individual prowess. An average American pilot, proficiently trained in boom and zoom tactics and flying a Hellcat, could effectively eliminate an expert Japanese pilot in a Zero without ever descending into a close-quarters turning battle. The American pilot would initiate a rapid descent from a superior altitude, unleash a torrent of fire from 6.50 caliber machine guns, collectively discharging an astonishing 4,800 rounds per minute, then leverage the Hellcat's superior speed to rapidly disengage and climb away before the Zero could mount a meaningful response. Should the initial pass fail to destroy the Zero, the Hellcat pilot would simply ascend again and repeat the attack. The Zero pilot, critically lacking the requisite speed for pursuit and the climb rate to match the vertical ascent, could only desperately attempt to evade until the Hellcat pilot potentially committed an error. The analysis of operational range further illuminated a profound philosophical divergence between the two nations' approaches to aerial combat. The Zero boasted an impressive operational radius of 1,800 miles, a feat achieved through rigorous weight reduction and exceptional fuel efficiency. The Hellcat, while perfectly adequate for its carrier-based operations, possessed a considerably shorter range of roughly 1,040 miles. However, by 1944, the Zero's extraordinary endurance had, paradoxically, become strategically irrelevant. Japan was increasingly engaged in defensive warfare, and American carrier fleets had advanced sufficiently close to the Japanese home islands and contested territories that the Hellcat's operational range was more than adequate for all necessary combat missions. In a cruel twist of fate, those additional miles the Zero could traverse ultimately came at the catastrophic expense of vital protection, a deficiency that might have preserved the lives of countless Japanese aviators. Observing both formidable fighters side by side at the Yokosuka naval base, the engineering team gained profound insight into two fundamentally opposing visions of modern warfare. Japan had, in essence, crafted a sword, an instrument of war that was exquisitely elegant, lethally precise in the hands of a skilled warrior, yet inherently fragile. America, on the other hand, had forged a hammer, perhaps seemingly crude or less refined, but devastatingly potent and remarkably resilient, almost indestructible. The sword had proven effective when Japan held the strategic initiative, when its seasoned pilots could judiciously select their engagements. However, as the conflict inexorably transformed into a grinding campaign of attrition, characterized by relentless wear and tear, the brutal truth became undeniable. Hammers, in the end, invariably break swords. We kindly invite you to stay with us and watch the remainder of this compelling video. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Please also feel free to share a comment about your geographic location and your thoughts on the crucial topic we are discussing. The technical reports emanating from Yokosuka began their circulation throughout Japanese naval aviation circles in late 1944, yet they served primarily to corroborate the dire warnings that frontline pilots had been vociferously articulating for many months. Combat veterans, who had endured the brutal aerial battles over the Marianas, the Philippines, and every fiercely contested island across the vast expanse of the Pacific, had been submitting after-action reports that resonated less as dispassionate tactical assessments and more like harrowing narratives of survival and loss. These deeply unsettling accounts could now be contextualized and understood alongside concrete engineering data, which precisely elucidated the underlying reasons for the appalling and unsustainable casualty rates among Japanese pilots. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most distinguished flying aces, a pilot who had remarkably survived combat since the very genesis of the war, provided poignant testimony that was meticulously appended by engineers to their Hellcat analysis. Sakai, having been shot down and severely wounded in 1942, enduring the permanent loss of sight in his right eye, had nevertheless demonstrated immense fortitude by returning to active combat duty. His August 1944 report vividly recounted an engagement over Iwo Jima where his formation of Zeros successfully intercepted a group of Hellcats. "We achieved good position above them," Sakai meticulously recorded, "and dove to attack. I fired at one from behind and saw strikes on his fuselage and wing. He did not catch fire. He did not fall. He simply rolled away and dove, accelerating to speeds we could not match. I had hit him perhaps 20 times, and he flew away as if nothing had happened." This utterly bewildering and demoralizing pattern of resilience on the part of the Hellcats recurred in report after report, becoming a ubiquitous and chilling theme. Pilots consistently describe expending their entire ammunition loads into Hellcats, only to watch the seemingly impervious American fighters continue their maneuvers, still actively engaged in combat. The 7.7mm machine guns, which had proven adequately effective against early war Allied aircraft, were now rendered completely impotent against the Hellcat's advanced armor plating and robust structural integrity. Even the more potent 20mm cannon rounds, unless they achieved direct hits on critical, unarmored components, frequently failed to incapacitate or bring down the Hellcats. Conversely, a mere single burst from a Hellcat's array of .50 caliber guns would comprehensively shred a Zero, often instigating immediate and catastrophic structural failure, as unprotected fuel tanks ignited explosively or crucial control surfaces were violently shot away. The psychological ramifications of this profound and brutal mismatch were, quite simply, devastating for the Japanese aviators. Japanese pilots were acutely aware that they were venturing into battle aboard what were essentially flying death traps. They understood with chilling certainty that a single well-placed hit could instantly seal their fate, while their adversaries appeared to possess an almost supernatural invulnerability. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, a veteran who had led fighter units throughout 1943 and well into 1944, meticulously recorded his private thoughts in a personal journal, which was later recovered and excerpted in official reports detailing the catastrophic collapse of pilot morale. His entries painted a grim picture. The men know they will not return. They know our aircraft cannot protect them. They fly anyway because duty demands it, but you can see the death in their eyes before they take off. We are not fighting a war. We are flying to our executions. The tactical reports that accompanied these deeply personal and poignant testimonies presented an equally grim and unvarnified portrayal of the aerial struggle. Japanese formations had painstakingly developed elaborate and intricate tactics specifically designed to counter the Hellcat's formidable advantages, yet none of these strategies proved consistently effective. They attempted to lure American pilots into low-altitude turning engagements, a scenario where the Zero's superior maneuverability was most pronounced. However, Hellcat pilots, displaying commendable discipline and tactical acumen, simply refused to engage on such disadvantageous terms. They also sought to achieve numerical superiority, dispatching large formations against smaller American groups. Yet, the Hellcat's inherent speed advantage meant that American pilots retained the critical option to either engage or disengage at will, allowing them to selectively pick off stragglers and isolated aircraft, while skillfully avoiding situations that were tactically unfavorable. By the waning months of 1944, combat reports clearly indicated that Japanese pilots were increasingly resorting to desperate and often suicidal measures. Some aviators, having exhausted their ammunition or when their aircraft were too severely damaged to continue fighting effectively, attempted deliberate ramming attacks against the Hellcats. Others endeavored to utilize dense cloud cover and challenging terrain to establish ambushes, fervently hoping to close the distance sufficiently that their aircraft's maneuverability might, for a fleeting moment, compensate for the Hellcat's overwhelming advantages in speed, firepower, and protection. Despite these valiant, albeit desperate, efforts, none of the newly devised tactics managed to fundamentally alter the brutal mathematics of the aerial engagements. For every solitary Hellcat successfully shot down, Japanese formations were suffering catastrophic losses, sacrificing 10, 15, and on some harrowing occasions, even 20 aircraft. The dedicated engineering team at Yokosuka meticulously compiled these harrowing combat reports alongside their own detailed technical findings, culminating in a comprehensive and chilling assessment that reached the very highest echelons of Japanese naval command in November 1944. The report's ultimate conclusion was stark, uncompromising, and deeply unsettling. The F6F Hellcat represents a level of aircraft design and industrial capability that Japan cannot match with available resources. Our pilots are not being defeated by superior tactics or greater skill, but by an aircraft that embodies a fundamentally superior approach to fighter design. No amount of courage or fighting spirit can overcome the material advantages American pilots possess. The assessment went on to recommend the immediate development of heavily armed interceptors, incorporating some measure of armor protection, even if this necessitated a significant compromise in the maneuverability that Japanese doctrine had historically prioritized above all else. However, by November 1944, such insightful recommendations had become largely academic, rendered practically infeasible by the grim realities of Japan's rapidly deteriorating war situation. The nation's vital aviation industry was already struggling immensely under the relentless pressure of Allied bombing campaigns, severe and widespread resource shortages, and the critical loss of experienced manufacturing workers who had been conscripted into military service. While the captured Hellcat had undeniably illuminated the profound depth of the problem with crystal clarity, merely identifying a problem and possessing the means to effectively solve it were, as was tragically evident, entirely different propositions. The compelling revelations gleaned from the analysis of the captured Hellcat ignited a frantic surge of activity and urgent reevaluation across Japan's beleaguered aviation industry. In late 1944, Kawanishi, Mitsubishi, and Nakajima, the preeminent naval aircraft manufacturers, all received copies of the meticulously detailed technical reports, accompanied by urgent directives to immediately implement the critical lessons learned. Engineers across these firms promptly commenced drafting specifications for new fighter aircraft that would endeavor to incorporate some of the Hellcat's successful design philosophy. On paper, these conceptual aircraft appeared remarkably promising, offering a theoretical path forward. In the harsh and unforgiving reality of Japan's severely constrained industrial situation, however, the vast majority of these ambitious designs proved to be utterly impossible to bring to fruition. Kawanishi's most notable and direct response to these findings was the N1K2J Shurden-kai, a refined evolution of their existing N1K design that made a concerted effort to emulate some of the Hellcat's formidable capabilities. The Shurden-kai notably integrated armor protection for the pilot, equipped itself with advanced self-sealing fuel tanks, and mounted a formidable armament of 4 20mm cannons, capable of delivering devastating firepower. The prototype models displayed genuine promise, boasting impressive speeds approaching 370 miles per hour and demonstrating significantly improved high-altitude performance compared to the aging Zero. Test pilots enthusiastically praised its handling characteristics and its evident combat potential. Nevertheless, the challenges associated with its mass production proved to be an insurmountable nightmare. The Shurden-kai demanded approximately 17,000 man-hours for each unit to be constructed, a staggering figure more than double the time required to build a Zero, and its intricate design incorporated components that necessitated extremely high-precision manufacturing. Japan's devastated and bombed-out factories, struggling with chronic resource scarcity and a depleted workforce, simply could not consistently deliver the required quality or quantity. Consequently, only about 400 units of this promising fighter were ultimately completed before the war's inevitable conclusion. The exhaustive analysis of the captured Hellcat fighter was not merely an academic exercise. It yielded profound insights, some of which were only fully comprehended as the conflict neared its conclusion. Mitsubishi, for instance, embarked on an ambitious project to engineer the A7M Ripu, envisioned as the formidable successor to the iconic Zero. Drawing extensively from the meticulous study of the Hellcat's design, engineers conceived the Reaper with foundational improvements: a significantly more robust airframe, integrated armor plating for enhanced pilot protection, advanced self-sealing fuel tanks, and an array of potent offensive weaponry. The design specifications were remarkably demanding, stipulating a 2,000 horsepower engine, a powerhouse intended to grant the aircraft performance characteristics on par with the leading American fighters, all while striving to retain a measure of the Zero's fabled agility. On paper, these blueprints presented a truly promising aerial combatant. However, the maiden flight of the first prototype did not occur until October 1944, a substantial delay exceeding a full year beyond its original schedule. The designated powerplant, the Mitsubishi 9 Malawing Quachas, was perpetually hampered by a litany of developmental woes, including persistent overheating, critical bearing failures, and an alarming inconsistency in manufacturing quality. Consequently, this engine never reliably achieved its projected output. Ultimately, a mere 8 A-7M aircraft were ever constructed before the program was entirely abandoned. The underlying material scarcities contributing to these widespread failures were nothing short of calamitous, permeating every aspect of Japanese wartime production. The sophisticated self-sealing fuel tanks, which had so profoundly impressed Japanese aeronautical engineers during their Hellcat dissection, crucially depended on synthetic rubber compounds, a material Japan found itself utterly incapable of producing in sufficient quantities. Prior to the war, domestic rubber output had been negligible, with the vast majority of vital supplies originating from the newly conquered territories across Southeast Asia. Yet, by 1944, the relentless and highly effective campaign waged by American submarines had virtually severed these indispensable supply routes, strangling Japan's access to this critical resource. In a desperate bid to circumvent this crisis, engineers tirelessly attempted to formulate substitute materials, experimenting with natural rubber combined with various chemical treatments. However, the outcomes of these endeavors were, at best, erratic and unreliable. While some experimental batches occasionally performed adequately, others proved to be complete failures, rendering any semblance of consistent quality control an impossible feat amidst the increasingly chaotic state of Japanese logistics. As we delve deeper into these critical challenges faced by the Japanese war machine, we invite you to stay with us until the end of this compelling narrative. Your support, in the form of a like and subscription, would be immensely appreciated as we continue to explore these pivotal moments in history. Please also share your thoughts in the comments below, telling us where you are watching from, and what aspects of this historical topic resonate most with you. The predicament concerning armor plate was equally dire, mirroring the desperation seen in rubber procurement. The robust armor of the Hellcat, a key factor in its survivability, necessitated high-quality steel alloys possessing very specific properties of hardness and toughness. Japan's steel industry, which had never matched American standards in terms of scale or resilience, was by this point in a state of severe collapse, buckling under the dual pressures of acute material shortages and relentless Allied bombing campaigns. The limited quantities of steel that remained available were invariably diverted to applications deemed more strategically critical: the construction of naval vessels, the production of artillery, and the manufacturing of tank armor. Aircraft armor, regrettably, was assigned a significantly lower priority. When armor plate did eventually reach aircraft manufacturers, it was frequently substandard, often too brittle to withstand impacts or too soft to offer meaningful protection, thereby providing inadequate defense while still imposing detrimental weight penalties on the aircraft's performance. Even in those rare instances where adequate raw materials could somehow be procured, the subsequent process of manufacturing them into finished aircraft became progressively arduous. The systematic American B-29 bombing raids, which intensified dramatically in late 1944, specifically targeted vital industrial facilities across Japan. The Musashino Aircraft Engine Plant, a cornerstone facility operated by Nakajima, suffered repeated and devastating strikes. Predictably, production rates plummeted catastrophically. Furthermore, skilled workers, the backbone of precision aircraft manufacturing, were either conscripted into military service or tragically killed in the bombing raids, their places taken by inexperienced laborers utterly incapable of upholding the rigorous quality standards demanded by sophisticated aviation production. A Zero fighter that would have required approximately 10,000 man-hours to construct in 1942 now commanded 15,000 man-hours, or even more, a stark testament to the precipitous decline in worker efficiency and the increased necessity for rework due to failing quality control. The captured Hellcat, beyond its material and manufacturing revelations, also laid bare another intractable problem, one that no amount of ingenious engineering could possibly rectify: the profound disparity in pilot training quality. American pilots arriving in the Pacific Theater by 1944 had typically undergone an extensive and rigorous training regimen, accumulating well over 300 hours of flight time before ever engaging in combat. They had honed their gunnery skills to a point where hitting targets consistently was second nature, mastered formation flying until it became an instinctive maneuver, and diligently trained in tactical doctrines specifically designed to maximize their aircraft's inherent strengths. In stark contrast, Japanese pilot training had been ruthlessly condensed to a meager 100 hours by 1944, with severe fuel shortages forcing even that drastically reduced schedule to be further curtailed. Consequently, fresh pilots were arriving at frontline combat units barely possessing the fundamental ability to safely operate their aircraft, let alone effectively engage in aerial combat. The Japanese engineering teams grappled with a cruel and agonizing irony. They had successfully acquired an exemplary specimen of America's finest fighter aircraft, subjected it to a painstaking and exhaustive analysis, and thoroughly comprehended its manifold advantages. Yet, despite this comprehensive understanding, they remained utterly powerless to bridge the widening gap in capability. The Hellcat was not merely a superior aircraft in isolation. It stood as the quintessential embodiment of an entire industrial system that Japan simply could not replicate. It was meticulously constructed from an array of advanced materials that Japan found itself unable to access, and its production relied upon sophisticated manufacturing processes that Japan was fundamentally incapable of implementing. Every single lesson painstakingly extracted from the captured fighter served only to underscore another insurmountable and increasingly profound disadvantage for Japan. By early 1945, the strategic ramifications emanating from the Hellcat analysis extended far beyond the immediate realm of tactical aviation. What the captured fighter unequivocally revealed was not merely a performance differential between aircraft. It served as an unsparing window into the fundamental and ever-growing imbalance between the total war-making capacities of America and Japan. The high-ranking combined fleet staff officers, poring over the detailed technical reports, grasped the chilling reality. If America possessed the capability to construct fighters of such sophistication, and in the staggering quantities suggested by combat intelligence, then Japan had, in essence, already lost the industrial war, irrespective of how many individual battles might yet remain to be fought. The sheer scale of American production numbers was utterly staggering, defying belief. Grumman, the manufacturer, had delivered the very first production Hellcats to the U.S. Navy in January 1943. By the close of that same year, an astonishing total of over 2,500 units had rolled off the assembly lines. Throughout the entirety of 1944, production maintained an incredible pace, averaging nearly 500 aircraft per month. By the cessation of hostilities, Grumman alone would have constructed more than 12,000 Hellcats, a figure exceeding the total number of all fighter types produced by Japan's entire aircraft industry over the final 2 years of the war combined. And crucially, the Hellcat represented just one American fighter type among a diverse and abundant fleet. The Navy concurrently operated the F-4U Corsair in prodigious numbers, while the Army Air Forces deployed P-38 Lightnings, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-51 Mustangs by the thousands, each contributing to an overwhelming numerical superiority. Japanese intelligence officers, initially incredulous, meticulously compiled estimates of American aircraft production that seemed utterly impossible until multiple, independent sources unequivocally confirmed them. By 1944, America was producing in excess of 90,000 aircraft annually, encompassing transport planes, bombers, fighters, and trainers, literally every category essential for modern aviation warfare. In stark contrast, Japan's peak production year, also 1944, saw approximately 28,000 aircraft of all types manufactured. Even this diminished output was already in a state of rapid collapse under the relentless pressure of bombing campaigns and chronic material shortages. The Americans were building aircraft at a rate 3 times faster than Japan could manage, and, compounding this quantitative disparity, individual American aircraft were demonstrably superior to their Japanese counterparts. Across nearly every critical performance metric, the Hellcat analysis further elucidated the profound depth of America's technological and industrial integration. Every sophisticated component integral to the fighter, from the powerful R-2800 engine to the precision propeller, the intricate hydraulic systems, the advanced radios, the formidable weaponry, and the array of flight instruments, originated from highly specialized manufacturers. These suppliers produced these components in immense quantities, feeding them into multiple aircraft programs simultaneously. For instance, Pratt & Whitney engines powered dozens of distinct aircraft types, while Hamilton Standard propellers equipped a wide range of fighters, bombers, and transport planes. The vast, interconnected industrial ecosystem that underpinned the Hellcat's production was not only resilient and extensive, but was actively growing stronger, even as Japan's own manufacturing base continued its precipitous and irreversible deterioration. This stark realization compelled a fundamental and agonizing reassessment of Japan's entire strategic outlook. The nation's war plan, meticulously constructed over years, had rested upon a series of assumptions that now appeared tragically and fatally flawed. Japanese planners had naively believed that their initial string of decisive victories would grant them invaluable time to consolidate their territorial conquests and fortify defensive positions. This, they reasoned, would render any subsequent American counteroffensive prohibitively costly to sustain. They had further presumed that, after enduring heavy losses, America would ultimately be compelled to negotiate a settlement, one that would graciously permit Japan to retain control over the majority of its hard-won territories. The Hellcat, and the colossal industrial might it so powerfully represented, utterly demolished these foundational assumptions. American losses incurred in the Marianas, throughout the Philippines, and across the relentless island-hopping campaign had demonstrably failed to slow the offensive in the slightest. This was because America possessed the unparalleled capacity to replace its losses at a rate far exceeding Japan's ability to inflict them. For every carrier aircraft Japan managed to destroy, an astounding 3 more seemingly materialized to take its place. For every pilot tragically killed in action, 2 freshly trained aviators emerged from the vast and efficient American training pipeline. Japan, meanwhile, was hemorrhaging pilots and aircraft it simply could not replace. Consequently, each engagement, even those where Japanese forces succeeded in inflicting significant American casualties, left Japan proportionally weaker, trapped in a spiral of unsustainable attrition. Perhaps the captured Hellcat's most damning and disheartening revelation was the undeniable fact that American combat power was not merely sustained but was, in fact, still accelerating. Intelligence reports from early 1945 described new generations of American fighters already entering active service, improved variants of the Corsair, late-model Hellcats equipped with even more powerful engines, and, ominously, jet aircraft already deep in development. Each successive generation of American aircraft proved demonstrably more capable than its predecessor. In stark contrast, Japan's newest fighters, those precious few that actually managed to reach limited production, were barely competitive with American designs that had been in service since 1943. The technological chasm was not merely persistent, it was widening at an alarming rate, not closing. Confronted with this grim reality, senior Japanese officers began to contemplate options that, just a year earlier, would have been considered utterly unthinkable. A faction emerged advocating for an immediate, negotiated peace settlement, desperate to salvage what little remained before Japan's situation became completely hopeless. Conversely, others vehemently pushed for one final, decisive battle, a single, massive engagement designed to inflict such catastrophic and unacceptable losses on American forces that it would, by sheer attrition, force them to the negotiating table. These desperate and often acrimonious debates unfolded against the constant backdrop of the Hellcat analysis reports, resting heavily on desks across Tokyo, a tangible and ever-present reminder that Japan was locked in a struggle against an adversary whose industrial capacity had rendered any conventional military victory an absolute and tragic impossibility. The path to a definitive military triumph for Japan had become utterly unattainable. By the arrival of March 1945, the overarching strategic assessment was starkly unambiguous. Japan possessed an estimated 5,000 aircraft of various models, the vast majority of which were antiquated, and many remained grounded due to critical shortages of fuel or essential spare components. In stark contrast, the American forces advancing towards Okinawa commanded thousands of carrier-borne aircraft, complemented by formidable land-based air power operating from recently secured island territories. This numerical disparity was not merely unfavorable, it represented an existential catastrophe. The meticulously examined captured Hellcat aircraft had provided Japanese strategists with a precise understanding of the root causes of their mounting losses. However, a profound comprehension of the dilemma offered no viable remedies. Certain predicaments, once fully grasped, unveiled themselves as utterly insurmountable given the existing resources. Japan found itself squarely in this precise predicament during the spring of 1945. Throughout the concluding months of the conflict, the impounded Hellcat remained ensconced within a hangar at Yokosuka, serving as an inert yet potent emblem of Japan's impending demise. As the summer of 1945 unfolded, the engineers who had painstakingly documented every minute detail of the formidable American fighter had been redirected to more urgent, desperate endeavors. Their new mandate involved the arduous task of scrutinizing wreckage from devastating B-29 aerial assaults, and a frantic attempt to devise effective countermeasures against the relentless firebombing campaign that was systematically reducing Japanese urban centers to smoldering ash. The voluminous technical reports they had meticulously compiled now lay neglected, accumulating a fine layer of dust as the grim realities of strategic defeat eclipsed the value of detailed technical analysis. The intellectual clarity of understanding the reasons behind one's defeat held little practical significance when the war itself was already irretrievably lost. American military units discovered the Hellcat upon their occupation of the Yokosuka naval arsenal in August 1945, following Japan's unconditional surrender. The advanced fighter was situated amidst scores of other impounded and domestically produced Japanese aircraft, each meticulously tagged with comprehensive Japanese technical documentation. For the American intelligence personnel, the scene was profoundly surreal. There, before them, was one of their own cutting-edge fighters, meticulously disassembled and subjected to exhaustive enemy scrutiny, with every single component photographed and precisely measured. The Japanese technical blueprints were astonishingly comprehensive, demonstrating an acute grasp of the Hellcat's intricate design that remarkably paralleled Grumman's proprietary engineering records. It was akin to gazing into a looking glass that not only reflected one's own image, but also unveiled a nuanced external interpretation of what that image truly signified. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of this video for further insights. We would be truly grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below, sharing where you are from, and what you think about the compelling topic discussed in this video. The profound legacy of that particular captured fighter transcends its immediate operational role in the Second World War. It stands as an exemplary case study illuminating how armed conflicts are ultimately decided at the complex nexus of design philosophy, inherent industrial capacity, and overarching strategic foresight. The Hellcat achieved its unparalleled success not because it boasted the most elegant aerodynamic profile, nor because it was the most agile in aerial combat, nor even the swiftest. Its triumph stemmed from the fundamental understanding by Grumman and the United States Navy that prevailing in an air war demanded aircraft that could be manufactured in vast quantities, that inherently provided robust protection for their pilots, that possessed the resilience to absorb significant damage and continue fighting, and that could be readily serviced and maintained under grueling combat conditions by crews who were not necessarily highly specialized artisans. The Japanese engineers, who meticulously examined the captured Hellcat, possessed the acute discernment to recognize superior design solutions when they encountered them. However, mere recognition alone proved utterly insufficient to bridge the vast chasm between theoretical understanding and practical implementation. The iconic Zero fighter had been conceived and developed for a brief, decisive conflict, wherein Japan's inherently limited industrial infrastructure could conceivably produce enough fighters to establish temporary air superiority within a narrow operational window. Conversely, the Hellcat was engineered for a protracted, attritional struggle, a type of warfare where overwhelming industrial might and the paramount importance of pilot survivability would inevitably dictate the ultimate victor. Both aircraft, in their respective contexts, perfectly embodied their nation's distinct strategic visions. The profound tragedy for Japan lay in the fact that their initial strategic vision had been fundamentally flawed from its very inception. A more expansive lesson emerges from this historical episode concerning the dynamics of technological competition during wartime. The capture, meticulous examination, and subsequent analysis of enemy equipment is, and always has been, a standard and vital practice in intelligence gathering. Japan's engineers executed every aspect of this process flawlessly. They were exceptionally thorough, utterly professional in their approach, and remarkably honest in their assessments. Nevertheless, intelligence data holds true value only if one possesses the capability to act upon it. By 1944, Japan had irrevocably lost the capacity to implement the critical insights gleaned from the Hellcat's revelations. The pervasive material shortages, severe industrial bottlenecks, and crippling resource constraints that rendered Japan incapable of matching American fighter production were not issues that could be resolved through superior engineering ingenuity. These were intrinsic and fundamental limitations of Japan's entire industrial economy, and no amount of captured enemy technology, however advanced, could fundamentally alter the grim reality. The Hellcat's astonishing kill ratio of 19 Japanese aircraft for every single Hellcat loss stands as one of the most disproportionate combat records in the entire annals of aviation history. Yet, that stark numerical ratio does not encapsulate the full, complex narrative. A significant proportion of the Japanese aircraft decimated by the Hellcat were piloted by inadequately trained aviators, flying obsolete fighters, and embarking on missions that were, from their very outset, inherently suicidal. By the latter part of 1944, Japanese aviation had descended into such desperate straits that even a fleet of technically perfect fighters flown by highly expert pilots would likely not have significantly altered the eventual outcomes. The Hellcat was, in essence, confronting an adversary that had already been comprehensively defeated on the industrial front, even as the actual fighting continued for several more agonizing months. When historians delve into the intricate tapestry of the Pacific Air War, the captured Hellcat discovered at Yokosuka serves as an eloquent and perfect symbol of the conflict's essential, underlying character. Here was Japan's most earnest and capable attempt at deciphering American technological superiority, executed with commendable competence by skilled engineers who unequivocally recognized quality when they encountered it. Ultimately, none of this meticulous analysis mattered, because the war had profoundly shifted its nature. It was no longer primarily about the individual qualitative merits of specific aircraft. Instead, it had evolved into a brutal contest defined by superior industrial systems, unfettered access to vital resources, and the sheer, relentless capacity to absorb catastrophic losses while relentlessly maintaining offensive pressure. Japan, despite its best efforts, could capture and dissect every single American weapon system and still find itself utterly unable to overcome the fundamental, insurmountable asymmetry in industrial capacity. The formidable fighter was eventually repatriated to the United States, where it endured years in storage before undergoing a meticulous restoration process and ultimately being enshrined in a museum. It remains there to this very day, proudly displayed in its original American markings, bearing no visible trace of its brief, revealing interlude in Japanese hands. However, within the hallowed confines of historical archives, the Japanese technical reports persist, hundreds of pages filled with painstaking analysis, professional engineering assessments, and a progression of increasingly desperate recommendations. They collectively narrate the poignant story of an enemy who understood with chilling precision why they were losing, yet utterly lacked the practical means to alter the inevitable outcome. In the crucible of war, sometimes the clearest understanding of an insurmountable problem represents the cruelest form of knowledge, for it compels one to witness the inexorable approach of defeat with perfect clarity, yet without any conceivable ability to prevent it. That solitary captured Hellcat at Yokosuka imparted this devastating lesson to Japan more profoundly and thoroughly than any battle ever could.